and welcome to the Genshin Impact 5-star character overviews.
This time, we'll be covering the characters hailing from INAZUMA.
For each character, we'll be giving a general overview on their abilities, strengths, weaknesses, archetypes, recommended stat upgrades, as well as how to generally play them.
This will all be condensed into a closing panel at the end of each character section to show recommended weapons and artifact sets for each archetype, giving you a general idea of who you may want to pull for and what to look out for when farming.
For a full written version of this video, please check out the Artbook PDF by our graphics designer Zulfikar, detailing everything from this video complete with the script and images in a beautiful printable format. The link to this PDF will be in the description.
In any case, sit back,
relax, and enjoy the video.
Feel the power, baby! Wanna see me smash a boulder?
Leader of the self-proclaimed famous Arataki gang, Arataki Itto is a bold, carefree man who does everything in his power to let INAZUMA know of the Arataki gang's might. Arataki Itto is a big, burly himbo with a similar playstyle to match. Itto's normal attack, Fight Club Legend, is slightly different from most characters. Dashing or using his skill in the middle of his normal attack will not reset the combo, which is important due to his stack building mechanic. Itto's superlative super strength stacks are indicated by the Oni mask symbol on his back. He can have up to a maximum of 5 stacks, and his charge attack has a unique attack animation known as the Kesagiri slashes. Each Kesagiri slash will not consume stamina, instead consuming 1 stack of superlative super strength each, and when all stacks are consumed, Itto will do a final slam dunk like attack. We will bring up Kesagiri slashes as well as how to obtain superlative super strength later. Itto's elemental skill is the Matsatsu Zetsugi Akaushi Basto. When cast, Itto will throw his Kao Ushi towards a nearby enemy, which deals geo damage and will stay on the field for 6 seconds. Ushi will act as a taunt and distract nearby enemies towards him while inheriting the same amount of HP as Itto. If the skill is held, Itto can aim where he wishes to throw Ushi specifically. When Ushi hits an opponent, he will generate 3 to 4 geo particles and has a 10-second cooldown.
Who wants some of this?
Itto's elemental burst is Royal Descent! Behold, Itto the Evil! On cast, Itto will convert a percentage of his defense stat into attack, and infuse his normal, charged, and plunge attack with geo damage. This infusion cannot be overridden and will end if Itto is swapped off early. This infusion also includes his Kesagiri slashes, which increases his attack speed when you use them consecutively, as well as give him very strong super armor. This burst and his Kesagiri slashes, while infused, are Itto's primary source of damage. It has a 70 energy cost, lasts 11 seconds, and has an 18-second cooldown. Finally, we'll talk about how to get his superlative super strength stacks. Maintaining these stacks are going to be important, as Itto relies a lot on his Kesagiri slashes during his burst for damage. These are all the ways to get stacks: landing the 2nd or 4th hit of Itto's normal attack string, when Ushi hits an enemy, when Ushi takes damage, when Ushi leaves the field, and when you land the 1st or 3rd hit of his normal attack string during Itto's burst. Keep in mind that there's a limit of 5 stacks, and you should try your best to only use Kesagiri slashes when Itto's burst is active and when you have all 5 stacks active for the maximum amount of damage. Despite being a character who doesn't rely on elemental reactions, Itto's damage is very good and scales very well both with his personal and team investment. His Kesagiri slashes do massive damage and have a deceptively large AoE, allowing him to hit crowds of enemies that many other characters cannot. Not relying on elemental reactions also means you don't have to worry as much about rotational setups, as geo damage only has so many ways to buff itself. Additionally, despite being heavy hits, a Kesagiri slash does not stagger or knock large enemies back, which makes dealing with multiple big enemies like the Baptismal Vishaps or Rift Wolves much easier in both single target and AoE scenarios. Despite being a stack building character, Itto is still relatively easy to pilot and made even better thanks to his normal attack string not being reset when Itto dashes, which is great for both moving towards and dodging enemies. Being Geo, he also does not take up the typical supports that many other DPSs require, allowing you to use them in the other side of the abyss. Unfortunately, because Itto's teammates are more niche, that is also one of his biggest weaknesses. He often requires Goro and one more Geo character, notably Zhongli or Albedo, who are both 5 stars. While we praise Geo being easy to play as it doesn't rely on reaction damage, the trade-off is that it also has a lower damage ceiling. As such, Itto's team damage potential, especially at non-whale levels, is not particularly high and will require a ton of investment in both him and his team to perform competitively. It also doesn't help that his recommended artifact set, Husk of Opulent Dreams, is one of the most resin inefficient domains to farm. Playing Itto well is a relatively high commitment that can be a turnoff for many newer or lower investment players. Itto is a niche DPS with a niche playstyle and niche team requirements. He's a great main DPS, but only if you have all the moving parts to make him work. Itto is a brute who's both simple to play, yet does require some finesse to get his max potential. For his build, Itto's recommended artifact set is the Husk of Opulent Dreams with a defense percent Sands, Geo Damage Goblet, and a crit circlet. He should also focus on a substantial amount of energy recharge substats for permanent burst uptime. If you're looking for a big himbo with a fun yet unique playstyle to match, or are simply looking for the current strongest Geo DPS in the game, then unleash the Raging Oni with Arataki Itto.
Waves rise high out in the open seas. I too must reach new heights of strength.
After having witnessed the death of his friend at the hands of the Raiden Shogun, Kaedahara Kazuha flees INAZUMA to escape the Vision Hunt decree, befriending Beidou and joining her aboard the Crux fleet as a wandering samurai. Kazuha is arguably the best support character in the game. He excels at crowd control, even against large enemies, he greatly buffs any elemental DPS that isn't Anemo, Geo, or Dendro, and to top it all off, his damage is also very high, both from swirls or when built with crit. Kazuha's elemental skill, Chihayaburu, launches him into the air while pulling enemies into the center and dealing AoE Anemo damage. While Kazuha is in the air, doing a plunge attack will deal Anemo damage and create a wind tunnel that continues to suck in nearby enemies within a small radius. This skill can be held to further increase the damage, pulling strength, as well as radius of effect, though this will extend the cooldown from 6 to 9 seconds. If his skill comes in contact with any swirlable element, he can infuse that element, dealing additional damage of that elemental type with his plunge attack. If there are multiple swirlable elements on the field, he will only infuse one of the elements in the order of Pyro, Hydro, Electro, and Cryo. This skill can also be used while Kazuha is in mid-air, which is great for overworld traversal.
As one with wind and cloud.
Kazuha's burst is the Kazuha Slash. Kazuha will unleash a white slash that does AoE Anemo damage and creates an autumn field. This field will deal periodic AoE Anemo damage, as well as additional elemental damage ticks if it comes in contact with a swirlable element in the same infusion priority as his skill. Do note that the field can only have one additional element infused at any given time. This field lasts 8 seconds and has a 15-second cooldown with a 60 energy cost. However, Kazuha's greatest strength is in his A4 passive, Poetics of Fubutsu, where swirling an element will provide the team with an elemental damage bonus of that specific element type, scaling off 0.04% of his elemental mastery stat. This, when combined with the Viridescent Veneer set, makes him one of, if not the strongest damage buffer in the game. Kazuha is arguably the best character in the game right now. While he is no top tier DPS, he is almost always an essential support in any team comp that has a Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro main DPS. When built with full elemental mastery, he can provide a monstrous amount of elemental damage bonus to his teammates if he swirls their element. In addition, because of Kazuha's massive burst AoE, as well as lack of ICD on its elemental application, he is also essential to many reaction-based teams such as Meltgun U or Child International, since he can very reliably apply the element he infuses with each tick of his burst. Also, while Kazuha's primary focus is support, his own personal damage is surprisingly high too, as his swirl damage is very impressive with a full EM build, even more so if he is able to swirl multiple elements on the field. Kazuha also situationally has the strongest crowd control in the game. While its AoE isn't as big as Venti's, nor does he clump them up together as well, he feels much more comfortable to play with since he doesn't suffer from the poor auto-targeting Venti does, dragging enemies towards his center rather than away from him. Kazuha's pulling strength is also stronger than Venti's, being able to drag in or stagger larger enemies, a problem Venti greatly suffers from. This makes Kazuha really strong in something like an Ayaka team, who needs strong crowd control for her burst to reliably hit multiple enemies. Kazuha's strong buffing capabilities, huge AoE, lack of ICD, as well as top-class CC, make him an invaluable asset in a multitude of teams. His utility is simply too great both in the Abyss and the Overworld, and it helps that he doesn't require high investment or good artifacts to perform well. However, Kazuha is not a perfect character. While his skill's crowd control is strong, the follow-up plunge attack can sometimes pose a problem, since it is considered a heavy hit, thus being able to knock or even shatter frozen enemies. His burst slash also has the same issue, and so without his Constellation 1, you will often have the dilemma of whether to use his skill or burst first. Kazuha is also not amazing as a main DPS, especially without his Constellation 6, which makes him a much more viable damage dealer. While his damage is decent, it simply cannot compete with an actual top tier DPS who is buffed by Kazuha themselves, which means Kazuha doesn't often find much utility outside of being a support. Kazuha can also find himself with energy issues, mainly for players who do not have good artifact substats. This makes it a toss-up in terms of weapon options, as running an energy recharge weapon like Fathomless can give you better burst uptime, but will sacrifice his damage buffing capabilities. Speaking of his burst, the field animation, especially when infused with an element, can be very visually disorienting, making it hard to navigate when you need to exit the field, especially in domains or when dealing with enemies outside of it. Finally, with the advent of Dendro, Kazuha has found significantly less use and thus lowered his value as a must-pull character. While he is still strong in something like aggravate teams, the majority of Dendro teams do not require Kazuha, and because Dendro is generally a low investment but high damage floor element, Kazuha unfortunately just has a harder time justifying his team slot. Still, Kazuha is consistently one of the most used characters in Spiral Abyss, and for good reason. His team buffing and elemental application for Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, and Electro DPSs are almost always second to none, and his insane crowd control makes a ton of characters much easier to play. In fact, a lot of characters in the game might not even be top tier if it weren't for the fact that they can be paired with Kazuha, and is also the reason why you see him so regularly, even in whale speedruns. He is unquestionably one of the best characters in the game, and a highly valued support in the majority of team comps. For his general support build, we recommend running Viridescent Venera as the main set, with Elemental Mastery main stats on the Sands, Goblet, and Circlet. His substats should be focused on additional Elemental Mastery, as well as Energy Recharge for burst uptime. So, if you use a Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, Electro DPS, play Elemental Reaction based teams, looking for some of the best crowd control in the game, or are simply looking to have a super fun yet super strong character, then follow the wins with Kaedahara Kazuha.
Though I cling to that which has given me the strength to hold on, the weight of letting go is ever foreboding.
In the land of Inazuma, where political power within clans plays a huge part, Ayaka stands tall as the daughter and the public face of the Kamisato clan. Her reputation precedes her, for all have heard of her kind-hearted and gracious nature, and her unwavering dedication to serve her people. Being one of the strongest DPS characters in the game, Ayaka has the ability to deal massive damage as a freeze-focused main DPS. Just like Mona's dodge or sprint, Ayaka has a similar ability. Kamisato Art, Senho, is an alternate sprint that applies cryo onto nearby enemies when she comes out of it, as well as restores some stamina and gives her an 18% cryo damage bonus. Coming out of this dash also infuses her normal, charged, and plunge attacks for 5 seconds, turning all of them into cryo damage. Speaking of which, her normal attack talent, Kamisato Art, Kabuki, is one of Ayaka's most used parts of her kit. Her unique charge attack has a very high vertical hitbox and decently wide AoE, dealing good damage when infused with cryo from her sprint. Ayaka's elemental skill, Kamisato Art, Hyoka, is a simple skill that deals 1 instance of AoE cryo damage and can launch small enemies into the air. There is no hold version of this skill, and it has a 12-second cooldown. This skill's primary purpose is to generate particles for Ayaka's high burst cost, generating 4 to 5 cryo particles when it hits at least one opponent.
Embrace the ice!
Ayaka's burst, Kamisato Art, Soumetsu, summons a snowstorm with whirling icy winds that slash 19 times repeatedly towards its closest enemy. The snowstorm explodes after its duration ends, dealing 1 additional instance of AoE cryo damage. This ability snapshots, meaning you should set Ayaka up with buffs first before casting this. At talent level 10, this burst has a monstrous 4131% damage multiplier, making it one of the highest amounts of damage that can be unleashed within such a short time window in the entire game, and thus also being Ayaka's main source of damage. This burst has a very high energy cost of 80 and has a 20-second cooldown. Ayaka has extremely consistent cryo application. Her dash as well as her cryo-infused attacks means you can constantly freeze enemies as long as you have a reliable hydro applicator in the party. Against most non-boss type enemies, you can usually be very confident in keeping them rooted, making it much easier for you to inflict damage on them. Ayaka's greatest strength is her insane elemental burst. With such a massive damage multiplier, she can often wipe out nearly any enemy in the game with ease. Even against Abyss bosses, her huge damage means that you will likely be able to 2 or 3 cycle them with high enough investment. Ayaka's greatest strength is also her greatest weakness. To land as many hits of her burst as possible, you first have to make sure that the enemies are both frozen and crowd controlled. Her burst ticks knock weaker enemies back on each hit, which can make it difficult to get as many ticks in as possible. This could potentially push enemies apart and effectively waste a lot of her damage potential, especially since her burst has such a high cost and long cooldown. Its high cost also means that Ayaka often needs significant energy recharge or a cryo battery, as not being able to cast her burst once it's off cooldown can be a big DPS loss. Ayaka isn't exactly the most free-to-play friendly character around, as her optimal free supports are pretty much all 5 stars, such as an AoE Hydro Applicator like Mona or Kokomi, and an Animal Crowd Controller like Venti or Kazuha. Ayaka is a character who needs a ton of support to play optimally, or a lot of her own damage will go fairly wasted. Ayaka is one of the strongest characters in the game, thanks in part to her insane elemental burst and decently strong charge attacks. For her build, we recommend using Blizzard Strayer as the main artifact set with an attack percent sense, cryo damage goblet, and crit circlet like any normal DPS. If you're looking for arguably the strongest cryo DPS in the game with a focus on insane elemental burst damage, then put some socks on and dance in the water with Kamisato Ayaka.
Power is only a source of comfort when it is concentrated in one's own hands.
Forced to become the head of the Kamisato clan at a young age, Kamisato Ayato is the current Yashiro commissioner, loyally serving the almighty shogun as a means to continue protecting his family's legacy at all costs. Ayato is a simple character with a very easy DPS playstyle. His elemental skill, Kamisato Art Kyoka, causes Ayato to shift positions and leave behind a watery illusion that explodes when there are nearby enemies. Upon casting this skill, all of his normal attacks will be converted into a unique type of attack that doesn't allow him to do charged or plunge attacks. Instead, he will do a wide slash that deals AoE Hydro damage. This Hydro infusion cannot be overridden and will last 6 seconds. Each Hydro Slash has standard ICD, generates 1 to 2 Hydro particles when a slash hits an enemy every 2.5 seconds, and has a 12-second cooldown. This is Ayato's primary source of damage in the majority of his playstyles.
Kamisato Ayaka, Suiyu!
Ayato's burst, Kamisato Art Suiyu, casts a big field of rain that lasts 18 seconds. Enemies in this space will constantly be targeted by the raindrops, dealing Hydro damage and increasing the normal attack damage of characters within the field. His burst is a pretty good off-field Hydro applicator if you can maintain its uptime. Just like his sister Ayaka, his burst cost is pretty high at 80 energy, though he can be made as a pure burst DPS for certain team comps if built with enough energy recharge, and especially when paired with another Hydro character. This burst snapshots his stats at the end of the casting animation, has standard ICD, and has a 20-second cooldown. Ayato's greatest strength is arguably his role and playstyle. He is extremely beginner friendly. His kit is really easy to understand and use well. You could put him on most teams as a main DPS, or just use his burst for some off-field AoE Hydro application in something like a freeze team. Another strength to Ayato's kit is his elemental skill. After casting it, each normal attack's AoE is extended both horizontally and vertically, allowing it to hit multiple targets much further away and higher than Ayato. For example, if the mobs are grouped up together in Venti's burst, his attacks can definitely hit them even though they are lifted fairly high up. His skill's decent Hydro application also makes him a pretty good driver in Bloom teams, both in things like Hyper Bloom and Nilu Bountiful Cores. His burst also adds to this, making Ayato one of the better AoE Hydro applicators in the game, as long as your team allows him to remain on field. Ayato's elemental skill is sadly a bit wonky to use at times. It attacks the enemy closest to you, and you cannot choose which one to prioritize unless you move closer to your target. Having 2 or more enemies that come close to you at the same time might cause Ayato to hit each one separately. Ayato also tends to have significant downtime, as his skill has a 12-second cooldown, and his burst cost is very high. As such, he might not be suitable for teams that have shorter rotations and demand less field time from supports. His burst in particular, due to his high cost and not great solo energy generation, makes it a little difficult to use every single rotation. At C0, his personal damage is good, but also not anything amazing. While it is decent and scales well with vertical investment, he does require some of the best supports in the game, such as Bennett, Xiangling, and Kazuha. Ayato is a very simple character who does not take much knowledge to play. You click E, then you hold left click for 6 seconds, then swap him off. He does, however, require some very good supports for decent personal damage, and he is While good, not the best bloom driver in Dendro teams. He's a very solid character that will perform as well as you invest in him, but is not someone who we consider broken or game breaking. For his build, we recommend a standard DPS build path using an attack percent Sands, Hydro Damage Goblet, and a crit Circlet. This build will also work in the majority of Bloom teams, as Ayato is usually only a driver and not essential for the reaction damage. So, if you want a solid Hydro DPS with a very basic playstyle that's effective and no nonsense, then enlist the assistance of the Yashiro Commissioner, Kamisato Ayato.
Give this shooting fireworks straight into the skies with a bow business a shot.
Every summer, beautiful fireworks light up thanks to INAZUMA's most skilled fireworks crafter. As the owner of Naganohara Fireworks, Naganohara Yoimiya is devoted to spreading joy through her fireworks across all of Narukami Island. Yoimiya is a character who excels at dealing with enemies from a distance with her extremely fast, pyro-infused normal attacks, making her a very unique character on the roster. Yoimiya's normal attack talent, Firework Flare-Up, performs 5 consecutive shots with a bow. Her normal attack scaling gradually increases from the first to the last hit, and is her primary source of damage when infused with a skill. Yoimiya's charge attack will generate a maximum of 3 kindling arrows based on time spent charging. After firing, the kindling arrows will home in on nearby opponents. This charge attack is relatively useless. Yoimiya's elemental skill is the Niwabi Fire Dance. When cast, Yoimiya's normal attack will do increased damage and be infused with pyro. This effect lasts for 10 seconds, and during this time, Yoimiya is incentivized to remain on the field and continuously deal damage with her pyro-infused auto attacks. In the event where Yoimiya is swapped off early, her infusion will also end. While infused, her normal attacks have standard ICD pyro application, meaning only 1 in every 3 hits will be able to perform a reaction like Vaporize. Thanks to her A1 passive, continuously using her normal attacks will also gradually increase her pyro damage for up to a maximum of 20%, which is quite good for on-field damage.
Here come the fireworks!
Ryukin Saxifrage is Yoimiya's elemental burst. She leaps into the air and fires a firework that marks one nearby opponent with Aeorus Blaze. This mark will deal pyro damage towards the marked enemy when any party member other than Yoimiya attacks them, triggering every 2 seconds and lasting for 10 seconds. Additionally, Yoimiya's A4 passive will buff all of her team members with a 10% attack bonus upon casting her burst, which can be increased depending on how many stacks of her A1 she has. In the event where the marked enemy is eliminated before the burst ends, Aeorus Blaze will pass onto another nearby enemy who will inherit the remaining duration. Yoimiya is a powerful character who excels against single target enemies, particularly bosses. Thanks to her auto attack range, she's able to attack flying bosses with ease, such as the Golden Wolf Lord and the Thunder Manifestation. Having such long range helps a ton as she does not have to chase enemies down much, a problem other single target focus units such as Hu Tao tend to face. With a variety of weapon options such as the 3-star slingshot to 4-star upgrades like Rust and Hamayumi, Yoimiya is fairly accessible in her loadout. Her artifact sets also tend to be quite flexible, with one of her recommended sets, Shimenawa's Reminiscence, being a very resin efficient domain to farm thanks to Emblem. Additionally, she can be used in a variety of team comps such as Mono Pyro, Hyper Carry, and Double Geo/Hydro plus Double Pyro teams. While Yoimiya is excellent at dealing single target damage, she's comparatively weak when it comes to facing large groups of enemies. Yoimiya is also a ranged attacker with no defensive capabilities, and thus prone to taking damage when enemies are close to her, making her vulnerable to being interrupted during combat. She benefits greatly from having a shielder, as her getting interrupted can sometimes be a big DPS loss, particularly if you're playing with vape reactions. Yoimiya also faces some strong competition in terms of pyro DPS due to characters like Hu Tao and Xiangling, so she can be a little difficult to recommend from a meta value perspective. Still, Yoimiya is a very competitive character when heavily invested into, and is also extremely easy to play. Her excellent range gives her comfort that many other DPSs simply do not have, and against certain bosses in the game, she can trivialize them with ease. Being a main DPS, she can be built with very standard DPS stats, using an attack percent sense, pyro damage goblet, and crit circlet. She can also use an elemental mastery sense for those who specifically play a reaction based Yoimiya like Vaporize. She can use a wide variety of artifact sets depending on the playstyle. If you want an excellent ranged character who excels at spewing strong single target DPS, then light up some fireworks with Naganohara Yoimiya.
Rainfall alone does not constitute a storm. Thunder is required.
Ascending to Archonhood after Raiden Makoto lost her life in the Cataclysm, Raiden A now serves as the deity ruler of Inazuma, promising her people an unchanging and everlasting eternity. Raiden Shogun is one of the best and most versatile Electro characters in the game. She can be played both as a traditional on-field DPS, thanks to her massive damage when well invested, as well as a reliable off-field Hyperbloom activator now, with Dendro's introduction to the meta. Raiden's elemental skill, Transcendence Baleful Omen, summons the Eye of Stormy Judgment when cast. This eye will follow the active character and give them two main properties. Firstly, when the on-field character deals damage to enemies, they will also deal coordinated AoE electro damage. This electro damage has decently wide AoE and can proc every 0.9 seconds, allowing it to very reliably trigger hyperblooms. Secondly, the active character will also have their elemental burst damage increase, with it increasing by a higher percentage the higher the energy cost. This skill lasts a very long time at 25 seconds with only a 10-second cooldown, meaning it has permanent uptime.
Now you shall perish!
Raiden's elemental burst is the secret art Muso Shinsetsu. Raiden will draw her Muso no Hitotachi and deal one big initial slash before converting all of her follow-up normal, charged, and plunge attacks into electro damage for the next 7 seconds. This electro infusion cannot be overridden. For the traditional DPS Raiden players, this burst is the primary source of damage, as its damage multipliers are incredibly high and also scale remarkably with tailored supports. During this burst window, Raiden also has incredibly strong super armor, meaning she will not take knockback or get interrupted. When Raiden attacks enemies with her burst, she'll restore energy to her party members, which scales off her own energy recharge stat. She also gains more electro damage bonus the more energy recharge she has, thus incentivizing players to build her with a ton of energy recharge to boost her personal damage and team supporting capabilities. This burst has an energy cost of 90 and an 18-second cooldown. Raiden is one of the most versatile characters in the game. She can be played both as a traditional DPS or as a Hyperbloom activator. She scales incredibly well with vertical investment, and with good support, she is a very competitive main DPS. She also offloads a lot of her team's energy recharge requirements thanks to her burst being able to restore energy to her entire party, allowing her teammates to be built with more offensive stats for greater team damage. Alternatively, because of Raiden's long off-field and quick electro application with her skill, she is also arguably the best Hyperbloom activator in the game. Not only does she proc electro very quickly, but her Hyperbloom build is very low investment, making it a great option for those who do not have good artifact builds. Even in other Dendro teams, such as for Spread, Raiden is an excellent support, being able to reliably maintain quicken on enemies, and coming in on the field to burst during her teammates' downtime while restoring their own bursts. Raiden's versatility lends herself as one of the easiest flex slots in a large number of teams, and her personal damage when heavily invested into is very impressive for both free-to-plays and whales alike. While Raiden's burst is very strong, it does require a lot of support and artifact investment at C0 to be competitive. Also, its duration is quite short at only 7 seconds, so it does have quite a bit of downtime in between rotations. In Hyperbloom playstyle, Raiden's burst also goes mostly ignored, as she would often be built with full EM, meaning her own personal damage will be incredibly low, thus sacrificing a large portion of her kit. Raiden is an incredibly strong character, whose very effective kit makes her work both as a very strong traditional DPS as well as Hyperbloom activator. She has aged incredibly well since her release and has only gotten better with Dendro's introduction. She is strong no matter the level of investment and will likely be a huge addition to anyone's roster. For her recommended builds, she can go with a traditional DPS setup, focusing on her personal damage, using Emblem of Severed Fate as the main artifact set, with an energy recharge or attack percent Sands, an Electro or attack percent Goblet, as well as a crit Circlet. Main stat choices and stat balancing will depend on substats and the type of weapon she is running. Alternatively, for Hyperbloom players, she can just be geared out with full EM on all of her pieces, making this playstyle very low investment friendly. If you want an incredibly versatile Electro character who can function both as a top tier DPS or as one of the best Hyperbloom characters around, then get ready to spend an eternity with the Raiden Shogun.
To survive hardship, you must prepare for hardship.
Feeling the weight of responsibility to her people, Sangonomiya Kokomi became the divine priestess of Watatsumi Island, taking on the mantle to provide hope and happiness to her people. Kokomi is a great all-rounder Hydra support and also being one of the best healers in the game. With the addition of Dendro, Kokomi has risen in popularity due to her Hydro application and healing being essential for certain Bloom teams. Kokomi's elemental skill, Kurage's Oath, summons a jellyfish that periodically deals hydro damage to nearby enemies while also healing whoever is currently on field. This skill is highly effective in team compositions where healing and/or hydro application is needed thanks to its lack of ICD, and thus greatly benefits things like Bloom or Freeze teams. This jellyfish will remain on field for 12 seconds but has a slightly long 20-second cooldown. Kokomi's Elemental Burst, Nereid Ascension, deals hydro damage to her surroundings before donning a ceremonial garment onto Kokomi for 10 seconds. While having the ceremonial garment, Kokomi's normal and charge attacks will deal damage based on her max HP, and also heals her allies when her attacks hit enemies. She also has the somewhat useless added benefit of being able to walk on water and has slight super armor during its duration. Swapping to a different character would end the burst's duration early. This burst's primary use case is to extend her hydro application uptime, as casting it refreshes the duration of her skill's jellyfish. This helps play around its relatively long downtime of 8 seconds. Kokomi's strengths come with her ability to apply hydro in a big radius around her. This is essential for Nilo or Freeze teams since with her AoE, Dendro cores are produced more efficiently and opponents can get frozen much more frequently. As compared to Mona, who shares a similar off-field elemental skill, Kokomi's jellyfish does not have ICD, which helps her apply hydro much more consistently. She's also one of the best healers in the game, with really strong off-field healing and being able to heal the full party while using her elemental burst on field. This double duty typically allows teams to run a flex slot or more offensive characters, as she fulfills both the healer and off-field hydro applicator roles very effectively. Kokomi is also one of the easiest characters in the game to build, as she can run off fairly garbage artifacts thanks to her very minimal stat requirements, making her build much more accessible to newer or lower investment players. While Kokomi is a powerful support character, she has some disadvantages. Her passive talent, Flawless Strategy, although giving her a 25% increased healing bonus, comes at a cost of negative 100% in crit rate. While this does mean that she can be built much more easily as mentioned previously, it also means that her DPS potential is much lower than most characters on the roster. Her elemental skills Jellyfish also has an interesting quirk where, when used, will apply hydro to everyone around her, including herself. This may lead to situations where Kokomi gets frozen due to cryo enemies having already applied cryo onto her, which could be annoying to deal with. Also, her skill has a fairly long downtime of 8 seconds if you don't refresh its duration with her burst, and the jellyfish only stays in one spot rather than follow her, which might make it less effective when fighting large waves of mobs in AoE scenarios. In summary though, Kokomi is a solid character, whose multi-purpose kit makes her the best option in most Freeze teams, and a top option in Nilo Bloom teams. While her hydro application isn't as fast as Xingqiu or Yelan, its AoE is more of her speciality, in which case she's rivaled only by Mona, who offers better damage but less overall utility. For her build, we recommend sticking to a normal healing build in most scenarios, using Ocean Hue Clam as the main artifact set with an HP % Sands, hydro damage or HP % Goblet, and a healing bonus or HP % Circlet. If you're looking for one of the best healers in the game and happen to take a liking to Freeze or Nilo teams in particular, then start your strategic planning with Sangonomiya Kokomi.
Many people dread the sound of thunder. To me, it sounds fondly familiar.
The head shrine maiden of the Grand Narukami Shrine, Yae Miko, is a revered figure in INAZUMA, having served as the Raiden Shogun's familiar for over half a millennia. Yae Miko has aged well after the introduction of Dendro in 3.0, being a very versatile unit, both as an off-field DPS and quicken applicator, as well as an on-field hyperbloom activator. Yae Miko's skill, Yakan Evocation, Sesho Sakura, makes her teleport in a direction based on where you are facing, while leaving a turret behind her. She has a maximum of 3 turret charges, which should generally all be cast in succession. Each turret periodically deals electro damage to one nearby target. If the turrets are close enough, they will connect to each other, indicated by a purple lining, and increase their damage based on their level. At Constellation 0, the highest level she can go is level 3. Unlocking Yae Miko's A4 passive will also increase her turret damage based on 0.15% of Yae Miko's elemental mastery. Each turret can last a maximum of 14 seconds on the field.
A sight to behold.
Yae Miko's elemental burst, Great Secret Art, Tenko Kenshin, unleashes a thunderbolt that strikes enemies in a fairly wide AoE. While Yae Miko's turrets are active, Casting her burst will destroy the turrets and unleash up to an additional 3 thunderbolts depending on how many turrets were on the field. As such, it is recommended to have all 3 turrets down before casting her burst for the maximum amount of damage. Her skill cooldown will be completely reset afterwards, allowing her to place her turrets back down immediately. Yae Miko is incredibly flexible thanks to Dendro teams. Being an Electro Catalyst also means all of her basic attacks are infused with Electro, thus allowing her to trigger Hyper Bloom very easily when used on field. Alternatively, Yae's off-field skill allows her to be both an amazing sub-DPS as well as quicken applicator, making her a fantastic support for Dendro DPSs such as El Hatham or Tignari. The latter in particular greatly benefits from her compared to someone like Kuki Shinobu thanks to Yae's enormous range on her Electro application. Her skill damage is also very impressive when heavily invested into, especially when paired with Aggravate, which raises her damage even further. Having 100% uptime on it means her stream of DPS is very consistent, and allows her to have a very hands-off playstyle, as you really do not need to do much else after casting her skill. Because of her Elemental Mastery scaling, Yae Miko is much easier to build, as both her personal damage as well as Aggravate reactions benefit from EM stat rolls, so she's a lot more flexible with both her artifact sets and stat requirements. Yae Miko has very low base defense, meaning she can take a ton of damage when she has to cast a skill. Furthermore, while casting her skill, she does not have any invincibility frames, which when combined with her long field time requirements for a sub DPS, can hurt her team DPS slightly if she gets interrupted. Also, while her burst is really strong, it comes with an expensive 90 energy cost and a very long 22-second cooldown. This means that you will very rarely be able to cast this burst every rotation. Even if you are able to, this greatly extends her field time as she has a long animation and needs to spend time recasting her turrets again. In Hyper Bloom teams, her skill also has much less utility, as the turrets cannot target Dendro cores easily since the auto-targeting prioritizes enemies instead, meaning she is usually forced to remain on the field to use her normal attacks in this particular playstyle for consistent Hyper Blooms. Finally, Yae Miko isn't exactly the most free-to-play friendly character around. Her weapon options are quite limited, and even her best 4-star option, the Witsith, isn't that great as it has a randomized buff with a long cooldown, limiting her overall DPS since her skill cannot snapshot the buffs of this weapon. Yae Miko is a character who was not very good on release, but has improved greatly with the advent of Dendro. Her off-field nature makes her flexible in many Dendro teams, and her personal damage scales very well with investment. While she does suffer from certain quality of life gameplay quirks, she is still a very valuable character to have for players who like playing Dendro DPSs or Hyper Bloom. For her DPS build, Yae should be built like a standard DPS with either an attack percent or elemental mastery sands, an electro damage goblet, and a crit circlet. For her Hyper Bloom playstyle, she can go full EM on all of her stats, or use the same build as before for a hybrid setup. Her artifact sets will vary greatly on the playstyle and are quite flexible. So, if you're looking for a strong sub DPS with a very unique autopilot playstyle and excellent electro application for a variety of Dendro teams, then head to Grand Narukami Shrine and get crafty with Yae Miko.